Krishna says to Arjuna, thinking of whatever state of being, he at the end gives up his body, to that being does he attain, O son of Kunti, Arjuna, being ever absorbed in the thought thereof. Now, think that if the 5 to 7 activities you do each day are so important when you remember them, then when you reach 70, 80 or 90 years of age, then you remember the 1 or 2 most important things you did at your life, the thing that the mind has been running after throughout your whole life. These are such important activities. How much have we contemplated about them? All our energies and all our life force are directed towards them, and that is why we remember them. Otherwise, we would not remember them. What does a businessman do at the end of his day? He has been trading throughout the whole year, where money has been coming in and going out. But what does he do at the end of the financial year on 31st of March? He pulls out his balance sheet and he looks at the last line, that is net profit or net loss. He just has to remember that, and he forgets everything else. In the same way, what does this person who's a businessman of life look at the end of his life, when he has to pull out his balance sheet of his life on 31st of March, which represents the time of his death? What happens at that time? He looks at the net profit or the net loss of his life, which is the one event that he remembers throughout his whole life. This important event is our earning and the thing on which our entire life force has been focused throughout our entire lives. From this, it is determined what the person has done throughout his entire life. If a person remembers food at the end of his life, and there are people like this who always remember food, then this means that he has cultivated the vasana, the mental impression of taste throughout his whole life. This is all that he has done, and he has not done anything else. If a person remembers his child at the time of death, then throughout his whole life, he has done only this. The child is his only earning of his whole life, and everything else was immaterial to him. One can remember his child while leaving the body. For example, if there's a grandfather and his son, or a father and his son got married, and his wife is pregnant, then this grandfather, to-be grandfather, is always thinking about this in his mind every day, that this person just dies one day just before the wife gives birth to the child after 9 months. All the people nearby get together telling everyone how nice this little baby is, and how the baby's eyes are exactly like the grandfather's eyes, and how the baby's nose is exactly like the grandfather's nose. They say that whenever the baby laughs, then it's exactly in the same way as the grandfather laughs. In fact, they say it's as if the grandfather has come back again. This is because the baby was in the grandfather's mind, and nothing else was in the grandfather's mind. His entire life became just that. What I mean to say is that whatever state one remembers at the time of death, then one attains that state. Remembrance of something during one's last moments is a fruit of one's whole life. It is the answer to the question of this person's life. Therefore, if one wishes to improve the last moments of his life, then they should improve their whole lives. If you want the right answer to the question, then the whole process should be right, step by step. This is because only if the process is right will the answer be right. If the process is wrong, then the answer will also be wrong. There are many people who are clever. Their process is wrong, and still they look for the right answer. They say that everybody else is doing the wrong process. They just look at everybody else. They say that they like the story of Arjuna very much. Who knows the story of Arjuna in the Srimad Bhagavad? They say, there's this story in the Srimad Bhagavad that at the time of death, Arjuna said Narayan, Narayan, the name of God, and attained liberation. They say that it doesn't matter what they do throughout their whole lives, because at the time of death, they will say Narayan, Narayan, and will attain liberation. This is the wrong process and the right answer. This is what happens. But a true examiner knows straight away that the process is wrong, and this person got the right answer, but how? It is because he must have cheated. And when the examiner knows that this person has cheated, then the examiner writes a cross, and a person does not get the marks in examination if the process is wrong. If an examiner of the world knows that the process is wrong, then what about he with a capital H, who is the support of the world and the Lord of the three worlds? Kartuma kartuma marta kartum samatra te lokyanat. Will he not know that this person has not done anything throughout his whole life, but just because he says Narayan, Narayan, should God give this person liberation? What do you take God for? If a person has the wrong process but the right answer, then the person will not get the marks. On the contrary, if the process is right, then it doesn't matter if the answer is slightly wrong. Those who take examinations will know that the examinees get marks step by step. When Guruji was doing his SSCs, then they would tell him that we should know each and every one of the steps while answering an examination question. One gets a mark for each and every step. Then it does not matter if one makes a mistake in the final step and so does not get the right answer. But if the first three steps, for example, are right, then the examinee will get the 3 marks for those 3 steps. This is also true in the mathematics of life. If the process is right and a person has gone forward on the right path, then if they make a mistake in the end, God will say that because your first 3 steps are right, you can advance further in your next birth. You'll definitely get marks for these steps. In order to improve your final moment in life, you should take your life towards the imprints of that which you wish to remember at the time of death. You should make your mind focused on that thing day and night, every day and every night. Decide the direction. In the West, there was a very big scientist in the field of management science. He wrote a book and he put a very beautiful concept in this book. He says that 2 things have an effect on our lives. There are 2 instruments that science has given that have the biggest influence on our lives. The first is a watch, and the second is a compass. Well, I guess you have Google Maps now. First is a watch, and the second is a compass. We do not have much experience of holding a compass as we do of holding a watch. This scientist says that both these instruments look the same, and if you put them in front of a small child, then the small child will just think that they're both watches. The first instrument is the watch, and the second instrument is the compass. You look at a watch, at the same time you look at the compass. The watch shows the time, whereas the compass shows the direction. You have walked for 10 hours and you have done well, but have you walked 10 hours in the right direction? If you only look at the watch and do not walk while looking at the compass, then it's not necessary to walk for 10 hours, because if you walk for 10 hours in the wrong direction, then all your efforts have gone to waste and you will have to come back and go back in the other direction. Therefore, it is not enough that you have made an effort, you have to make an effort in the right direction. It is good that you're looking at a watch, and the watch will give you regularity, and the watch will give you discipline, but at the same time, you should also keep a compass. If I were to say it in another way, then it is fine if you do not have a watch, but a compass is very necessary. It is very important that you are going in the right direction. Walk in the right direction. No matter if you have walked 10 hours, you've only walked 3 hours, but at least you've walked in the right direction. You reach early or late, but at least the direction is decided. If you just go out and just have a watch in your hand, then you will make mistakes. Whenever I'm thinking about today's times, then I feel as if the whole of society is walking according to the watch and nobody is looking at the compass. If there is a difference between science and dharma, then it is this. Science gives a watch, whereas dharma gives a compass. Dharma shows us the direction in which the activity is taking us. You should go in the right direction. A person should make a decision early in life of, am I going in the right direction? The frustration that a person gets to when he's 60 or 70 and gets a realization of failure, then why does this happen? The person has made a lot of efforts and has lost a lot of sweat, but the person has not gone in the right direction. You should keep a compass with you at all times. Make sure you are going in the right direction. The state that Sri Krishna is talking about in this verse is exactly this. A person goes in the direction of which he remembers at the time of his death. This depends on the direction that the person has looked at throughout his whole life. It is an undoubted principle. It is undebatable. It is unquestionable. one reaches the state at the time of death of that which he has thought about throughout his whole life. This is the direction in which the next birth takes place. The earnings with which we go to sleep today, the same earnings start off our next day. In the same way, the earnings with which we attain death and leave this life, the next birth will begin with these earnings. That is why Shri Krishna says very nicely in the last line of this verse, see here, that one is always absorbed in that thought thereof. Therefore, there is only one remedy to attain God, and that is always to be absorbed in God. Sada is a word used, it means always. One should always be colored in the colors of God. One should think only about God. When one has colored themselves in the color of God, then there's a very beautiful bhajan, a devotional song, entitled Ranga Vijane Rangma. You should color yourself in the color of God. When one goes to God, then one becomes like God. Vedantis give the example that when you throw a stick of wood in a fire, then at the beginning, the stick of wood looks like a stick of wood and does not catch fire immediately, but when slowly and slowly the stick of wood remains surrounded by fire and the stick of wood catches fire, then the stick of wood begins burning and then looks exactly like fire. Not only that, but when you pull that stick of wood out of the fire, then that stick of wood comes out bringing fire with it. It comes out bringing the flame and the burning with it. Not only sticks, but also iron is the same. If you put a piece of iron in fire, then at the beginning it looks like iron, but when the iron remains surrounded by fire and begins burning and burning, then it becomes so red that you do not know whether it's a piece of iron or a piece of coal. The iron looks exactly like fire. Just like the stick of wood or the iron changes while remaining surrounded by fire, in the same way, when one remains always absorbed in God, and the individual always remains in the Supreme Soul and thinks about the Supreme Soul all the time, then the individual soul also becomes the Supreme Soul. The person becomes colored in the colors of God, and such an individual remembers God during his final moments. A question arises in our minds. Shri Krishna is saying that one becomes the feeling that one remembers during one's last moments. One may therefore have the question that if one always thinks of a human being or creature, then therefore becomes that person or creature. I'll explain how they become that later. Then what if that person always thinks about matter? What if he thinks always about material things? I said earlier that a grandfather who's always thinking about his future grandson, then that grandfather will come back as a grandson. We accept this, and it is fine. But what if someone remembers matter? What if one remembers an object? What happened to the person who remembers his house at the time of death? Does this person then become a house in his next birth? No, because once one gets consciousness, then such a person does not become material, doesn't become materiality. This is a rule of evolution. Of course, I do not mean to say that a house is matter. If you look at the most subtle out of the subtlest principles in the house, then these will have motion and consciousness. Saints and scriptures explain to us that a person who thinks about matter at the time of his death and leaves his body, then what happens to that person is that person gets reborn as a life, but in the life that has relationship with that matter. This is what saints and scriptures say. For example, if one remembers their house at the time of death, then great personalities say that the house, the person has been thinking and thinking about this house, and he left his body, this person gets reborn in a life that has a relationship with that house. For example, a mouse, a spider, or other insect living in that house. Such a person is born in this way because his mind was always in that house. This person does not become matter himself, and this person doesn't become stone himself, but he is reborn in a life that has a relationship towards that house. This is what saints and scriptures, great saints and scriptures say. Secondly, let us remember an important thing. That which we remember during our last moments is not predestined. A lot of people ask Guruji that he's saying all of this, but how will they know what they will remember during their final moments? They say that whatever God wishes will happen. It doesn't happen like that. It is about what we wish for and what we make efforts for. Therefore, it is not predestined. It depends on the karmas that we have done throughout our whole lives, and our karmas are subject to our efforts. Shri Krishna said earlier in the Gita that karmanya adhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana, meaning the karmas that we have performed after making a decision determined that which we remember during our final moments and therefore our next birth. Therefore, we ourselves select our next births. It is not a helpless, destined concept. It is not as if we can do nothing about it. It is absolutely in our hands. It is dependent upon our efforts. Now, how does this new life happen? If we remember something, then how do we go into that, into our next lives? Research has been done in the field of parapsychology. It is said in our scriptures, but modern parapsychology, which goes much deeper than psychology, says that this is true. There is an event of Jad Bharat in the Srimad Bhagavad. Anyone heard of it? Jad Bharat? Bharatji was praying to the sun in the forest one morning during the last moments of his life. A baby deer came into his hands, a baby deer. He saved it, but held on to it, and throughout his whole life, the rest of his life, all he remembered was that deer. During his last moments, he only remembered the deer, and therefore his next birth was in the body of a deer. Such a knowledgeable Bharatji, who had performed a lot of austerities, penances, lived such a great life, was the son of Rishabdev, an incarnation of God, yet just this happened during his final moments, and his next birth was of a deer's body. How can this happen? We can understand it in two ways. The first is scientifically, and the second is through practice. The researchers in the field of parapsychology say that the waves and vibrations of that which we remember at the time of death leave very powerful vibrations in the atmosphere while the soul is leaving the body. What is the soul? The soul is not an object, it is an energy. This energy leaves the object, but the resolves, remembrances, and thoughts of that energy leave a very powerful vibration in the atmosphere. These waves go with the soul. These waves get recorded, and not only do they get recorded, but they keep moving. Just like the vibrations leave a radio station or a TV station and match the radio and television in our houses when they're caught by the aerials, in the same way, before this individual leaves the body, the waves and vibrations of the thoughts are very powerful. These vibrations are very powerful. Our minds have so much power. Even while we're in the body, the telepathic waves we have are very powerful. So how powerful must these waves be when the individual leaves the body, because all the energy in one's life comes together? Just imagine the power in those vibrations. These are so powerful that they are left in the atmosphere. These waves are always moving. After that, according to one's relationships and karmas, that individual, with those waves, a man and a woman, come into a relationship and give birth to that type of body. I'll explain this to you by way of a simple example. If a person gets a dog as a pet and likes the dog very much and is always thinking about his pet dog, the pet dog, Mira laughs, is called Tommy, and a person is always thinking Tommy, Tommy, Tommy. If this person does not remember the name of Ram, but remembers the name of Tommy, then this person remembers his dog Tommy during his last moments, then what happens is that this wish becomes so intense that it goes as waves and vibrations into the atmosphere around him, and according to the relationship he has with his dog, a male dog and a female dog get into a relationship, and this person goes into the female dog's womb after leaving his human body, and his soul that is there pulls the 5 elements. What are the 5 elements? Earth, water, fire, wind and ether, as Shri Krishna says in the 15th chapter of the Gita, Vayo Gandha Nivashyat, and creates the body over there. This has always been there in our scriptures, but today's scientists have proved this in the field of parapsychology. This is how this person is born. Therefore, the journey of our next lives is decided by us ourselves. When mountaineers are doing mountaineering, then what they do is that at the time of going from one mountain to another, they do not climb down from the first mountain and then climb up the second mountain, because this will take a lot of time, energy and money. Instead, they pick up the rope with a hook and throw it onto the second mountain. If there is a tree on the second mountain, then the hook will get stuck to that tree, and the mountaineer goes straight to the second mountain using that rope. This same activity is done by us when we go from one body to another. When we go to the last moment of our lives, then at that moment we throw a rope in the form of our wishes, and we hold on to that rope to get our second bodies. This is what human beings do. We have understood it scientifically, and now we should understand it through practice. Why are we not able to find the connection? There are penances and parts of yoga from which we're able to find out where our previous births were, why we have come into this birth, and what we can do in order to improve our birth. We have activities in order to achieve all of this on the path of yoga. But as a common human being, if we try to look at this, then what is this? When you go to take a photograph in a studio, then the cameraman is getting the scene ready, and you're putting on clothes that you like, and you're doing your hair properly. Then the cameraman comes, arranges the lights, adjusts the position of the camera, and everything else. We sit down, and the cameraman either lifts our face or tells us to look in another direction. We have done everything and are ready and are fixed for the photograph to be taken. Then the photographer tells us to smile a little, and we also smile. We do all of this, and when the photographer says 1, 2, and 3, then suddenly we think as if there's something on our nose. I try to find out where, and the photographer clicks the camera at that moment. When the camera gets clicked, and because this is a prestigious photographer, and it was a project to have the photograph taken, the photograph is enlarged after a few days, and when we go after a few days to get the delivery of the photographs, then the photographer shows us the photographs that have come out of the machine, and we see that the photograph has come out wrong. We think that our eyes are so nice, and our faces are so nice, yet why has this photograph come out like this? Why is it put up on Facebook? Is this the photographer's fault? No, because during that last moment, and that moment of the click, the feeling, mental state, and thoughts that you had froze, and then you were relaxing for a few days, thinking that the photograph will come out nice, but that frozen image does not go anywhere, and your imagination cannot freeze that photograph during that last moment. In the same way, the last moment of your previous life froze, and the time which passed in the middle, that can be from 12 to 13 days to 100 years, goes into the next life, and we begin from that thought, feeling, or moment. This feeling gets frozen. Guruji remembers that one time when he went to Kenya in East Africa, anyone here from Kenya? Okay. He had an acquaintance in a very small town called Kericho. Heard of it? Kericho. Very small town. If you walk just a little, well, then the whole town would end. The whole town, there are about 8 to 10 Gujarati families. There were more before, but they all left. There is one street that is the market street. This acquaintance of theirs had a photo studio and a shop there. He stayed there for one day before leaving the town. It was going very well with the God's grace. All of their customers were from an African background. Guruji taught them a word that they should be called Shyam Sundar, beautiful like Shri Krishna. Shyam is the name of the organization, means dark, beautiful like Shri Krishna. These were his customers. As Guruji was passing the town, they asked him to visit the shop. He went there and saw how much of a crowd was there, because the studio had opened on Monday morning after the holiday on Sunday. They told him that Africans have a lot of interest in photos. They love taking photos so much, and they have a lot of vivacity in taking photographs. They take their photographs, and then they say in their language that this is not me. A lot of inconvenience is caused in explaining to them that this is them, and this is their photograph, because the same number that is there on the bill is on the back of this photograph. The shop owner proved that it was them, but they still say it is not them. They cause a lot of hassle and arguments. They say that it is not them in the photographs. The shop owner would ask why it is not them in the photograph, and they would say that in one photograph they'd worn a suit and a tie, but they have not worn a suit and tie, so how can this photograph be theirs? At that time, they have to be reminded that when they came to have their photograph done 4 days ago, they sat down and they were given a suit and tie to wear. The shop owner would show them the suit and tie that they wore 4 days ago. These people would then say, yes, of course, this is my photo. They conveniently forgot, but innocently. They are simple and innocent people. They first say that they do not have a suit like this, and therefore it's not their photo. They say that they do not have a tie like that, and it's a fact. This is what happens to us as well. We are all like the Africans. We are all Sham Sundar, beautiful like Shri Krishna. When we remember something during our final moments, and something happens into our next life, then we forget and ask God why this happens, because we did not wish for this. God then says, this is your wish, and you did all of this. Shri Krishna says that one should always be absorbed in him. If one has remembered the Supreme Soul throughout one's whole life, then one will remember the Supreme Soul during their final moments. Srimad Adi Shankaracharya Ji has done a very beautiful analysis of Shri Krishna saying that one should always be absorbed in him by saying that one should have feelings only for the Supreme Soul, love only for the Supreme Soul, and thoughts only for the Supreme Soul, and that Sada Sarvada Tad Bhava Bhavita Tasmin Bhavaha Tad Bhavaha Sa Bhavitaha Swamamartya Abhyastaha Yena Saha Tad Bhava Bhavita Sa. One confirms oneself to that repeatedly remembered being. One confirms oneself to that repeatedly remembered being. One becomes the person who one has thought about throughout their whole life. Shri Krishna has demonstrated the principle here. What then should one do in order so that one can remember God during one's final moments? Shri Krishna shows us how in the next verse, verse 7.